All right, so if you're building with LLMs, you absolutely know this feeling. You tweak a prompt, you run a few examples, and it looks good. It feels right. So you merge it. But how do you actually know it's better? And more importantly, how do you stop what our guest today calls shipping on a vibe? To help us figure that out, we've got an MLOps expert here to walk us through building a minimal, viable evaluation harness. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, glad to be here. It's such a critical topic. I see it causing so many silent headaches for teams that are just trying to move fast, but they're breaking things and they don't even realize it.
So let's just start there with that core problem. You share this quote with us, and it really hits home. Can you unpack what you mean by a silent prompt regression? Why is that so scary?
Oh, absolutely. So a silent regression is when you make a change to a prompt and it seems like an improvement in one area, but it subtly, quietly breaks something else. It's not like traditional code where a test just fails loudly and blocks the build. Here, the output just gets a little bit worse, or maybe it's formatted wrong for a system downstream. You have no idea until a week later when you look at the metrics and realize half your users have been getting garbage results. It just totally erodes trust in the system.
And I'm guessing that's where this whole idea of vibe checking comes in. That's just teams eyeballing a few outputs and saying, yeah, that feels okay, and then merging it?
Exactly. And that is a recipe for chaos. The real engineering alternative is what you see on the right, an evaluation harness. Look, this isn't about vibes, it's about discipline. It's an automated system that scores every single change against a known fixed data set. It's deterministic. It replaces that subjective feeling with a cold, hard number, so you know for sure if you've made things better or worse.
This is great. So you've laid out a really clear blueprint for us to follow. We're going to start by breaking down the 4 essential components of this harness. Then we'll dig into that really tricky LLM-as-judge topic, talk about how this all scales from a startup to a big company, and then we'll wrap it all up with a super practical pre-merge checklist. Sounds like a solid plan. Okay, so let's get right into the nuts and bolts. What are the absolute non-negotiable parts of a minimal viable eval harness? The architecture is surprisingly simple. You really only need these 4 parts. First is the golden dataset. Think of this as your source of truth, a pinned set of really important inputs. The biggest mistake here is treating it as static. It has to evolve or it becomes useless. Second, the runner. Super simple, it just runs your system against every single one of those inputs. Third, the judge, and this is often the trickiest part. It has to grade the output, and the common trap is trusting an LLM judge on things it's just not good at. We'll definitely come back to that. And finally, the report. Please don't make this a fancy dashboard. It just needs to be a simple, diffable summary of the results. Getting these 4 things working together, that's the whole ballgame. Right, so this slide really makes that flow crystal clear. It's just a single, repeatable loop, right? You pull a case from the dataset, the runner makes a new output, the judge grades it, and the report gets updated. And doing that over and over is what gives you that consistent, comparable score every single time you make a change. Okay, let's double-click on that judge component, because you said it's where things get tricky. The big question on everyone's mind is, can't we just use a really powerful model like GPT-4 to automatically grade everything for us? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer is, well, sometimes. I like to think about it in terms of when an LLM judge is being honest versus when it lies to you. It's pretty honest for straightforward stuff, like grading for style, or checking if the output followed a specific rubric. But it starts to lie, or maybe more accurately, hallucinate with incredible confidence the second you ask it to grade subtle factual accuracy or complex reasoning. It will give you a score, for sure, but that score could be completely meaningless. And that leads you straight into a classic trap, Goodhart's Law. The moment you start optimizing your prompts for a flawed metric, in this case, the score from your unreliable LLM judge, it stops being a good measure of quality. You just end up getting really good at making prompts that please the judge, not prompts that are actually better for your real users. Okay, this all sounds really powerful, but let's talk brass tacks. Let's talk cost. Is building and running this harness gonna be expensive?
Yeah, that's a super common concern. And when you look at it at first glance, the cost seems trivial. For a small 50-case data set, a single run might cost you less than $1. Seems like a rounding error, right?
Well, that's exactly where the danger is. That tiny cost compounds, and it compounds dramatically. If your team is running that eval just 10 times a day as part of your CI/CD process, your monthly cost is suddenly $250. And as your product gets more complex and you add edge cases, once your data set grows to 500 cases, that monthly bill jumps to $2,500. All of a sudden, cost and latency aren't rounding errors anymore. They are real architectural constraints you have to design around. And that brings us to a really practical question. How should different teams approach this? I mean, the needs of a two-person startup are completely different from a big, regulated enterprise. What's your advice on adapting the harness to where your team is today? The key is to match the rigor of your harness to the risk of a regression. As you can see here, it's a spectrum. A small startup can probably get by with a tiny 20-case dataset and a pretty simple LLM-judge. But as you grow into a mid-stage company, you'll need more cases for each user flow and a more robust judging system, maybe even a multi-judge consensus. And for a big, regulated enterprise, now you're talking about dedicated datasets for each tenant and a mandatory human-in-the-loop review process. The goal is to just figure out where your team sits on that spectrum. That is a fantastic breakdown, but you mentioned a failure mode earlier, something you called harness drift, where that golden data set just stops reflecting what's actually happening in production. How do we prevent that? Yeah, the solution is just a simple, disciplined process. I always recommend a quarterly audit. Every 3 months, you pull 20 fresh examples straight from your production logs, and you specifically look for recent failures or new edge cases you hadn't thought of. You add them to the dataset, and maybe most critically, you assign an explicit owner. Someone has to be responsible for the health and relevance of this thing. Otherwise, I promise you, it will drift. What about tooling? I mean, there are a lot of new platforms popping up that promise prompt versioning and prompt management. Are those necessary?
Honestly, for most teams, absolutely not. My advice is simple. Treat your prompts just like code. Use get. You get history, you get blame, you get branching, you get code review, all for free. You almost certainly do not need another expensive dashboard.
Okay, we are getting close to the end, and this has been just incredibly useful. So let's bring it all together. What is that final critical checklist that every engineer should have seared into their brain before they merge a prompt change? Before any engineer hits that merge button, they should be able to answer these 4 questions. Number 1, does the pass rate improve or at the very least not get worse? Number 2, which specific cases failed now that used to pass? Be really explicit about those trade-offs. Number 3, which cases passed that used to fail? And number 4, and this one is crucial, have we added a new golden case to cover the exact bug this change is supposed to fix so that it can never come back? This discipline, this is what separates the reliable teams from the ones who are just vibe checking. Wow, this has been so insightful. It really does all just come down to treating our prompts with the same engineering rigor as any other piece of our system. So the final takeaway seems incredibly clear. If it's not tested, it's not shipped. Vibes are not tests. Build the harness. To our expert, thank you so much for breaking all this down for us today.
It was my pleasure.
If you found this helpful, hit subscribe and the bell so you never miss a video.